I'm going to talk about the common tone diminished chord in this video. Now, there are a lot of different functions for diminished chords that I've talked about in other videos, and I'll provide links to those videos in the upper right-hand corner. As diatonic chords, they can have a dominant function, like the 7 chord in both major and minor keys, and they can also have a dominant preparation function, as the 2 chord in a minor key. We've even talked about their very useful function as secondary chords, the secondary diminished 7 chord. But in this video, I'm going to discuss their use as a common tone diminished chord. While not really functional in a tonal sense, they're very widely used for their decorative quality, and you'll hear it extensively in popular classical and jazz music. I also seem to hear it a lot in barbershop quartet arrangements. Here's an example in the intro to the popular barbershop quartet arrangement, Sweet Adeline. I'll have a little fun and sing it for you.
In the evening when I sit alone a-dreaming of days gone by, love to me so dear, so dear. There's a picture that in fancy oft appearing brings back the timeline when you were near.
We'll start by reviewing the structure of a diminished triad. Remember, the diminished triad is built by placing a pitch a minor third above the root, and then another pitch a minor third above that. And the minor third is 3 half steps. Now, if we want to build a diminished 7th chord, we just build one more minor third above that. Of course, that results in a kind of unusual spelling. It looks like the pitch A on the keyboard, but we have to spell it as B double flat to show that it's actually a third interval. Okay, let's see how the common tone diminished chord works. It really is just a couple of chromatic neighbor tones. Notice that the G moves down to F sharp and back to G, and the E moves down to D sharp and back to E. But if you look at the structure that results, it's actually a diminished chord. You can see that pretty clearly on the piano. Notice that there's a common pitch C from chord to chord. That's why we call it a common tone diminished chord. If you want a fully diminished 7 chord, you'd add one more pitch. That would be A. And the voice leading would be the G going up to A and then back to G. But also notice that we spell it a little differently than we spelled the C diminished chord originally. That's because the voice leading is much more clear if the E flat is spelled as a D sharp moving up to E, and the G flat is spelled as an F sharp moving up to G. So the chord itself is not all that complicated, just a diminished 7th chord. But the spelling can be a little tricky when you're analyzing or writing the chord. Now, the most typical places that you're going to find the common tone diminished 7 chord are as a decorative chord leading to the 1 chord, or as a decorative chord leading to the 5 chord. Leading to the 5 chord, it's very similar to what happened with the 1 chord. Here you can see the A sharp leading up to B and the C sharp leading up to D with the result of a diminished triad. Again, we can add an extra note, the E, and make it a fully diminished 7 chord. So let's take a look at what common tone diminished 7 chords look like in 4-part voice leading. A few things to take note of. The chord of resolution, in this example, will contain a doubled 5th. It's a bit unusual, but it will allow for smooth voice leading. So we'll voice lead the common tone diminished 7 chord going to the 1 chord, and then going to the 5 chord, the 2 most common uses of this chord. To get the spelling right, think of the chord as being built up in minor thirds above the root tone D sharp. There are a few ways to think of this. D sharp is scale degree sharp 2. It's the leading tone of the E pitch of the next chord. In other words, the leading tone of the third of the 1 chord. Now some theory books call it the sharp 2 diminished 7. This is not a very functional Roman numeral, but it may help you to spell the chord correctly. When we write the common tone diminished 7 chord going to 5, we build it up in minor thirds from the root tone A sharp in this example. Scale degree sharp 6. Again, this is the leading tone of the third of the 5 chord, A sharp leading to B. You'll sometimes see this chord labeled as a sharp 6 diminished 7 chord. This is not my favorite label, since it is not a functional Roman numeral, but again, it may help you to spell the chord correctly. So now let's return to our example of Sweet Adeline from the beginning of the video, and to do that we'll need to move to the key of B flat. It would be typical to write a common tone diminished 7 chord either going to the 1 chord or to the 5 chord. Here we're going to consider a 5-7 chord and what that common tone diminished 7 chord would be. To identify it, we'll find the third of the 5-7 chord, the A, and then identify the leading tone of that, which would be G sharp. Let's build our fully diminished 7 chord off of G sharp, B, D, and F. For the voice leading, we see that there's a common tone, F. So we'll keep that in the same place. And then we can easily move by half steps from the common tone diminished 7 chord into the 5-7 chord as shown here. Let's find it in the music.
In the evening when I sit alone a-dreaming of days gone by, love to me so dear, so dear.
So there it is. Notice all the pitches are there. It's in a different inversion, but we can see the common tone F in the alto. We can see the D going to E flat in the soprano, the G sharp going up to A in the tenor, and the B natural going up to C in the bass. Let's close out this video by looking at a few compositions by classical and jazz composers. The first is by Tchaikovsky. It's his Symphony No. 6, Movement 4, or the famous Pathétique. To understand this chord, first we'll identify the third of the 1 chord, the F sharp, and then identify the leading tone of the F sharp, which is E sharp. Of course, the E sharp leads a half step up to the third. Then we can build the entire common tone diminished 7 chord as minor thirds above the E sharp, G sharp, B, and D. And here you can see that the common tone is D. Our next example is by Chopin, his Mazurka, Opus 50, No. 1. Here the chord is resolving to the 1 chord, G, and the third of that chord is B. So first we identify the leading tone of B, the A sharp. That leads a half step up to B. And we can build the common tone diminished 7 chord as minor thirds above the A sharp, C sharp, E, and G. And the common tone here is G. And finally, for this last example, we'll look at Duke Ellington's I Got It Bad and That Ain't Good. Again, in the key of G, we find the pitch that's the leading tone of the third of the 1 chord, that's A sharp going to B, just like the last example, and we build that common tone diminished 7 chord up above A sharp, C sharp, E, and G, all minor thirds. And again, the common tone is G.